We'd been married 27 years before we traveled to Europe for the first time, and our lives have never been the same. It opened our eyes to new ideas and new possibilities.
Very true. Most of our trips before that were around the U.S. in a minivan with 3 kids. Welcome back to Finding Gina Marie, our podcast about discovering family and our journey to relocate to Europe. This is episode 4. If you've missed any of our other episodes, please visit findingginamarie.com for links and information. Thanks for joining us. I'm Kevin.
And I'm Judy.
So in 2011, we were still living in Houston when I had an opportunity to go to a developer conference and actually be a speaker there. My buddy Scotty was offering to fly speakers over and pay for their lodging. So that was an opportunity for us to say, well, we could take a trip to the UK. We wouldn't have to pay for 2 tickets and not as much money on hotels. It seemed like the perfect opportunity to start our exploration of Europe.
You had traveled previously to Ukraine, so you were a little bit more familiar with international travel than me, but I definitely had a lot of FOMO. So when this opportunity came along, I was very eager to jump on it.
Traveling to Lviv was really just business, so I wasn't exactly a tourist over there, and I only stopped in a couple other cities for layovers like Amsterdam and Frankfurt. Wasn't exactly fun in the sun.
Well, I was super excited at the opportunity to travel. So the plan was that you and I would go together to the conference and I'd meet some of your friends and I would listen to you speak, but then I would go off and do my own thing. So I spent a couple of days doing day trips outside of where the conference was being held, which was a little town called Reading.
Yeah, it's just outside of Reading. So it was a ways from London. It wasn't exactly around the corner.
But there were trains, and I was really eager to explore London. It didn't seem like it would be too difficult to get around, and the tube seemed pretty straightforward. And so I went to Brighton for a day and got a chance to experience the beach and the hip, cool vibe that Brighton has. But then I also went to Harrods and had afternoon tea. I love afternoon tea.
I don't think I cared about afternoon tea at the time, so I was more than happy to send you off and say, enjoy yourself. And it was really nice to know that you didn't have to worry about renting cars or figuring out how to drive on the wrong side of the road or just getting around at all. I mean, the trains were pretty straightforward. They were quick. And it was just eye-opening that we could be many miles away from the place you want to go to, and you basically go to a train station and you end up in the middle of London.
It actually felt really empowering to be able to be in a strange place and get by on my own. I felt like a kid in a candy store with all of the sights and sounds and new experiences. It was wonderful for me.
Yeah, and you came back with stories, and I was even more excited to spend some time in London. I had to get done with that conference first, and then we could actually go vacation together.
We actually went into London proper and spent a couple of days there.
Right.
And then we went to the conference. And then after the conference, we came back and continued to explore, which was kind of nice because there were people who were native to the area and had all kinds of interesting recommendations for us for places to go and things to see and foods to eat.
Yeah, the only problem with that was I was so nervous about giving my speech at the conference that I couldn't really enjoy those couple days. And I said, we don't do this again. We vacation after. We'll just go straight to the conference if we ever do this again, because that was a lot of stress on me. And you had to put up with me practicing. It's like, you go out and see sights in London. We're here in London. I'm like, I need to practice.
I do want to bring up the point that this was 2011 and it was pretty tricky to navigate because there wasn't great Wi-Fi, and we actually had to go to a place in the airport and rent a Wi-Fi.
It's like MiFi. Yeah, it's a little connected devices that gave us local Wi-Fi for our phones. Those were horrible.
We're terrible. Because they never had enough battery.
No, they would last like 2 hours if we nursed it. Like we kept turning it off and then turning it on when we need it, and then you had to wait for it to connect. And
so of course we got lost, but I think that was part of the adventure.
It was.
And certainly now I'm appreciative of the experience in 2022, how seamless it all is compared to back then.
Was the first trip the one where we took too much luggage? Was that the second trip?
That was first trip.
That's the first trip. We took two
50-pound.
Yeah, we checked 2 bags, 2 50-pound bags, and our 2 carry-ons were nearly 50 pounds. They were like 30 pounds.
No, they weren't that heavy, but they were very
so
heavy because they had our computers, because we were expecting to have to work during the trip. And it was winter. We went it was March. And so we were expecting to wear heavy clothes
and coats.
And you were wearing a lot of blazers at the time. And
yeah, I was in a blazer period of my life.
So one of the most memorable situations that we had was one of the hotels that I rented required us to walk 6 flights of stairs with those lovely 50-pound suitcases. And also the tube had several stairs. It was before we realized that there were lifts, which are elevators.
Yeah, but even the ones that had lifts, some of them didn't have them all the way, it seemed. It seemed like we always got stuck with stairs no matter what we did. You actually rented a place that was...
It was a student area that we were in. And so they were kind of more like upscale dorm rooms.
Yeah, they had little kitchenettes in them, and they were very lovely. But looking up at those stairs, we made several trips up and down the stairs.
Yes, and there were times when you'd finally come down and we'd realize we forgot something. And, it was rock, paper, scissors to decide who was going to
go back up.
So one of the many, many things that I really loved about London and why it always will hold a special place in my heart is all of the places that I'd read about in books, classic literature, were right there, still in existence. I remember Dickens novels and Peter Pan. I actually was reading while I was on the trip, and they were talking about Kensington Gardens, and seeing everything in the book in real life was very surreal. I loved it. We went to the Sherlock Holmes Museum.
Yeah, our hotel was right by it.
That's right. Yeah. There were just so many interesting things to see at every turn of the eye. And the architecture. I absolutely loved the architecture. I feel like we were transported to another time, and it was just amazing to see so much history. The Apple store was in this 1800s building. So seeing how things could be repurposed to be modern, but still have all of the beauty and historic significance was just so refreshing, especially after living in Houston, where they don't really do a great job of preserving history and old buildings.
Yeah, most of the city is glass buildings. Anything that had any historic value really wasn't considered good enough. They wanted to raise it, take it down, put up new buildings. We had been to New York City, and I remember us getting into the city and just thinking, there's so much energy here. It just felt like the city was alive. You're coming from Buffalo and going to New York City. What a change. And they had subways everywhere. It seemed like we just would look over, there's a subway entrance. Pop down, pop up somewhere else.
It was just so vibrant and pulsating. It felt very alive. And I felt the same way about London, but 10x.
Houston didn't have any public transit, so we didn't really have anything but cars down there. And London and New York both had subway systems. That was just an instant win for us because, again, we don't want to be in London trying to drive because it's on the wrong side of the road for us. We didn't know what we were doing in that city. And some of the drivers looked like they were going pretty fast in these little old streets with the twists and turns. The roundabouts.
I don't really mean to diss Houston. I mean, it's a lovely place. One of the things that made it a little bit more challenging, and maybe why it didn't have that same energy, was it was sprawling. The downtown area was where people worked and not necessarily where people lived. And that disconnect, I feel like, really made a difference.
It totally did. There was a loop area around Houston where you worked downtown, and then in the evening, except for the theater district, which we did enjoy, you basically went out to the loop area. And then there were places you could hang out there. And then if you were more courageous, you went out to the next level out, which was a beltway. And we were even north of the beltway. So we had an hour drive to work on a good day and longer if there was traffic. So certainly experienced the downside of car-only lifestyles. Not that we had much of a choice. I mean, that's where we lived.
Yes. When we walk into London and we get on a subway platform and there's the signage that says mind the gas. There's one particular voice, a female's voice on the tube.
Recorded voice
that pipes in telling you what station you're approaching. And we used to love to, I think we still love to mimic that voice. And I mean, who doesn't love a British accent?
It sounds so much classier than our half Buffalo, half Texan accent that we had at the time.
Yes. And I personally just loved seeing all of the tube signs everywhere. It just made the city feel very approachable. It means that you only have a small amount of area that you have to navigate because the tube is taking you through most of it.
Right. And when you're not on the tube, it's certainly easy to walk. In fact, some of the times that we were in the tube, when we first started going to London, we really didn't know our way around. Even the subway map was a little confusing for us. And I kept going, we want to get to Leicester Square.
Leicester.
There was a lot of mispronunciation, mostly on my part. You did pretty well. When you went from station to station, we found out sometimes that was just across a bridge. We didn't have to go to every station. We could actually just walk. The city is pretty well connected as far as bridges, the Thames River, just getting around wasn't really that hard to walk. Sometimes we just wanted to go to Notting Hill.
Oh, my.
I know, fond memories of Notting Hill. We had to go there a few times over the years.
The Blue Door.
The Blue Door.
If you know, you know.
Yeah. We'll watch that movie tonight, I'm sure, after this. But it was just nice to be able to find our way around in a foreign city that we had no idea what we were doing the first time we were there, and we're able to figure it out. Even though our phones weren't connected and we weren't getting the Maps app working, it just wasn't that tricky. And we had a lot of tours. You scheduled walking tours, which helped so much to discover things.
For us, we love to explore, but I don't know a ton about history. Right. So traveling and hiring a tour guide in the city that we were in, not necessarily even private tours, but small group tours and walking tours specifically. We've taken a few bike tours, which are fascinating, but just kind of putting perspective around the various places and the significance of what we are seeing was just invaluable. I feel like it has just enriched our appreciation of London. And
I sometimes resisted them, and every time I went on one that Judy would book, I'd like, yep, good job, well done. We love to take the kids to the museums in Houston. So having all these museums in London
it was incredible.
Was just so good for us.
I don't know that I would necessarily recommend it, but even the double-decker buses, which we'd only taken once ever, but it did give us a bird's eye view of the city, even though it was freezing cold. And raining.
It's London.
Yeah, it gave us an opportunity to appreciate all of the art that was all scattered around the city. And I really just think that art nurtures the soul. Yep. And I don't know if I had such an appreciation before seeing it just everywhere.
Oh, exactly. I never thought about it much. I never thought about walking into a building, a church or a museum or someplace else, and knowing that this floor has been there since 1100 or 900
and all
AD.
Of the important people and, average people who have walked these same footsteps.
It made a huge impact on me, and just wanting to do it more, just feeling like we're missing out. That one trip to New York City made us feel like we need that energy. It would be cool to be in a city like that with that energy. And London felt the same way.
You mentioned about walking along the River Thames. I remember we took a boat ride and got to see all of the bridges, but it was freezing cold and it was pouring rain torrentially. And yet at the same time, for as miserable as the weather was, I just felt all of the history that was around us, including seeing the Tower of London and all the tragedy that happened there. I remember coming back from that trip and watching every historical movie that I could and just really appreciating those places at a different level when you see it in real life, and then art imitating life, imitating art. And
right. We just got done with that boat ride, which was already cold. It was covered, but it was still cold.
It was freezing.
It was freezing. So we got to the Tower of London. It's still sprinkling a little bit, and it's really bitterly cold. So we went to the gift shop, and we bought gloves and hats. Like, we were not prepared for this. We did not plan well for this first trip.
Freezing rain.
Yeah.
No, not at all. At the same time, for all of the weather issues, I felt like it was just really cool for us to see Big Ben and Parliament and all of these beautiful historical buildings.
10 Downing Street. We were walking by that all the time because of our first hotel. This is weird. We're just walking by it. We've heard about this so much. You see it in the news. You see these shots all the time, and we're just right here. So in 2012, I actually got another invite to go back and speak at the conference that year also, and we obviously planned another trip because why not? We're still getting the same kind of deal. 2 for 1. It was not as It was a great trip, but there was a level of stress because finances were a little tight for us. You know, we were doing okay, but we had 3 kids and a mortgage and
my father was living with us, and he wasn't in great health, and so we were supporting him. I just felt like there was this invisible pull towards London, and even though it wasn't maybe as idyllic as the previous trip was, I was still glad that we had taken the trip.
It was just another experience to go back and visit the places we already thought of as our places.
For me, I think one of my absolute favorite museums there is the National Gallery. I remember the first time just being so awestruck by artwork that was hundreds of years old, famous artists and paintings that I was familiar with, and to be able to be in the presence of them and actually see the brush strokes. It was just a surreal, incredible experience. Even though finances were tight and it was a stressful trip, it felt like going back and seeing some of those places was like visiting old friends. I don't know. It's one of those things. It's not, oh, I've done this once, I don't need to go back and do it again.
For you and I think especially, art is so nurturing. Architecture is so nurturing. Feeling you're among history is nurturing. We just thrive on that kind of stuff. And then in November of that year, I got to go back to the UK and just go to Tetbury. So it wasn't the same as going to one of the big cities. This was just a quick visit to record a video and hang out with some friends.
But that was actually a cool trip because it was a very small town and really, really old and historic.
And it had a really cool history of going bankrupt at a certain point. He was taking me around town, giving me the tour. It's like, so all these buildings were up to 1500. Then the town went broke for a couple hundred years. And then 1700, these buildings started. So you can see the gap there. We didn't have any money to build anything. Oh, cool. Even the small little towns have this amazing history to them.
I wasn't very thrilled that you went without me, but I did understand.
Well, and then I did it again. I went back for another of the same developer conference, and the third year. This time it wasn't in the same place it was before. It was in Leicester. I don't say it Leicester anymore. It was in Leicester, which was quite a ways away from London. And it was really not going to, we weren't going to have time. Like you said, your dad was with us and there was a lot of things going on. So I went alone and you were just
home alone. However, I will say that you made it up to me the following year because
the end of that year, actually.
Yes, that's true. Our 30th anniversary was at the end of that year in December, and you splurged and we celebrated our anniversary in Paris, which was absolutely incredible.
You were even trying to say, well, are we going to London first, then Paris? I said, no, we need to focus on Paris this time. We've been to London a couple times. Let's go back and just really embrace a new city.
That's true. And I'm really glad, even our previous trips, because we talked about, well, do we want to see Paris while we're this close?
Right.
London is such a vibrant city with so many interesting things to do. It almost does a disservice to it to then split your time, unless you really are staying for an extended trip, to give up part of it to Paris. They each deserve their own time and space to be enjoyed separately and perfectly. Paris was an incredible city in its own way, but it was December and it was freezing. Again, it was wonderful to walk along the river, Seine this time.
Yeah, we were paying for our anniversary in December again. This goes back to our December
Good
wedding.
point.
Yeah.
And if you watched any of our previous episodes, you'll remember we're from Buffalo, New York, and we left because we hate the cold.
Yeah. Even though the experience in Paris was wonderful, it would have been nice if we didn't have multiple layers and scarves.
Do you remember our trip to see the Eiffel Tower, which in my opinion is as incredible as its hype? I think it totally lives up to it.
Yeah, I remember you walking up to the thing and saying, can we just take the stairs and not the elevator? And they're like, no, the stairs are closed right now. You have to take the elevator up.
Well, we could take the stairs down, and we did.
Yeah, but I saved that negotiation for later. I thought I could talk you out of that after we made it up there. But yeah, once we got to the top, you got to go out on the observation deck. It was so windy and so below zero, kind of cold, or below freezing at least.
I think they had an opportunity for you to get champagne.
Yeah, and be outside.
And I had asked Kevin if you wanted to do that. He's like, no, I just wanted to get warm.
And this was like 5 or 6 o'clock at night, so it was dark already, and so it was even colder. There's no sun.
But that was actually a very cool beautiful part of it, yes, to have it all lit up.
The lights of Paris were just gorgeous.
Absolutely. I have great memories of the food we had there. We went to Angelina's, where we got this warm drinking chocolate, like from the movie Chocolat, where it was thick and rich and...
You got that. I actually tried coffee for the first time.
That's right, you did. And now you have this lifelong addiction that you didn't have. Because I think you were 51 at the time, which is pretty old to start drinking coffee.
Yeah, because I was a soda person. In fact, one of our trips to London, we went to this nice restaurant that was organic foods. And as my custom at the time, I said, yeah, I'll have a Coke with my meal. He's like, Coke isn't organic. We don't really serve that here. He said, we have wine. I went, wine's good. Let's do wine. And then when we went to Paris, I said, well, you know what? I have been trying to learn to like coffee. You were introducing me to mochas and stuff, but I really wasn't drinking coffee. I said, I'm just going to try a really good coffee at a Paris restaurant and patisserie. And it was good. I actually enjoyed it. I went, wow, the things I'm learning. I'm in my 50s and I'm still getting new stuff under my belt.
And one of the cool things about Angelina's was it was established in 1903. A lot of those restaurants have been there for decades and decades, and I think that was really cool. I feel a little bit naive that maybe there were some of these experiences or portions of them that we could have had in the States.
Sure.
I feel like it was just a perfect storm of all of these cool things all happening together that just really inspired us and lit our hearts up.
When you think about it, really, we had kids starting in 1989. So for several years, our job was to travel with the kids and make sure they got to see family and the Grand Canyon and different places that we wanted to take them. So there really wasn't a lot of opportunity for us to go explore many things on our own. We really were trying to raise them and give them as much of an experience of seeing other places than where they grew up in Houston.
Right, true. Going back to London was our very first meal, or one of our very first meals there, was an Italian restaurant, go figure. They had mentioned that the pasta and all of their ingredients were transported from Italy directly to London, which when you're in Europe, you can get all kinds of truly ethnic foods that are reasonably priced by people who may actually have lived in those countries.
It was kind of the thing. The foods, they were fresher.
And multicultural.
My friend that brought me over there the first time introduced me to real cheese, not Kraft American sliced cheese in plastic. He said, no, let me get some real bread, some real cheese. Everything was just more organic. We were exploring the food a lot. We were exploring coffee shops. I remember being out in Paris and just sitting outside, having coffee.
Well, you needed to do because you were freezing. That was the escape from the cold.
Yeah, we had a few days that weren't totally freezing. The one time, I think one of the first places we went to in Paris, we walked in and it was packed. It was, I couldn't imagine they would seat us anywhere. And the waiter took us over, slid a table out. You sat in the back. He slid the table back in. I sat in the front. And we had coffee and croissants or whatever else we had. It was lovely. Our experiences in Texas were so different because you have so much room.
Right.
They make everything first floor, spread out.
Everything in Houston can afford to be supersized
because they have so much space.
Everything is sprawling. Some people don't like the intimacy, but I think it is quaint.
In fact, we've had some lovely conversations with people at restaurants because of that.
I remember as a result of that trip, we came back and thought, could we afford to maybe live someplace like that?
Problem was, you had a really good job in the U.S. Were you working for oil and gas or law by that? You were oil and gas. I had my own software company, so I could work from anywhere. And we talked about that. Maybe you would get a job in London and I would just run my software company from there.
We weren't ready to do anything about it. It just kind of made our creative juices flow about what might be possible. Maybe not tomorrow, but certainly down a short road ahead.
Right. Yeah, we were probably going to wait for our kids to get through with college.
2014 was a very pivotal year for us for a number of reasons. The first was a tragic one, and that was because my father had passed away in February after being in and out of the hospital and dialysis and just really struggling with his body for a number of years, and it finally gave out. It was very hard for us because he'd been a fixture in our home for many years. It was great for our kids to be able to spend time with him. He had previously been living in Florida when my mother had passed away, and then his health problems brought him to Houston to live with us, which meant that our kids actually got to spend time and got to know him.
And he helped out.
Oh, yes. He loved to do grocery runs and
Walmart shopping. You know.
I don't know how he would have handled the pandemic when you couldn't get toilet paper, but we probably wouldn't have had to worry about it because he always bought 2 of everything anytime he saw a deal.
BOGO.
And BOGO. Every time that he went to the grocery store, he would just go to wander around, see what was new. Maybe there was some new product that he hadn't seen before. I don't know. He was a man of very little needs. Yeah. And so he was just satisfied to be able to
get a good deal. You know, he just had
get a good deal. Yes. While that was just a really sad thing for our family, it ended up opening up opportunities because we weren't tied down to living in Houston anymore.
Right. Now it was just down to which kids were finishing college, which kids were moving out, and then talking about, you know, what would we do if we moved? While that thought process was happening, a couple months after your dad had passed, I had this email on LinkedIn, and I was very confused because it said it was from an Apple recruiter, but it was 10 or 12 days old. I don't go on LinkedIn every day. I had my own software company. I wasn't job hunting.
And I remember you didn't even believe that it was a real...
No, I had asked my friend who had just been hired at Apple like a month or 2 earlier and said, is this a recruiter at Apple? Said, she looks legit. I don't know her personally, but yeah, I think so. So I responded to her email, and within an hour, I got a phone call from her. And she just asked me, she goes, we love your CV. We like your history, what you've done. Where would you like to work at Apple? I'll talk to some teams. You know, do you want to go to Pittsburgh? Do you want to go to Cupertino? I said, Pittsburgh? I don't want to go to Pittsburgh. I grew up in Buffalo. No, Pittsburgh.
Well, and what was interesting, though, is here you are, this 52-year-old man, not really expecting to be recruited by Apple at this season of your life. I feel like
what season is that, dear? How late of a season is this?
The spring.
Oh, thank you.
But it was one of those things that just, again, the universe just really pulling things together because you have been an Apple superfan forever.
Right.
So the fact that Apple, for this superfan, came around when it did, at no other time in our lives would we have been maybe open to considering an offer like this. I mean, certainly when my father was alive, we never could have entertained it.
Right.
And when our kids were younger, I don't know that we would have wanted to pull them away from family. Maybe it would have been appropriate.
We were doing things. We had family, we had friends, we had this community in Houston. So it wasn't like we were just hanging out there by ourselves.
Yeah, for most of our lives, I actually felt like we were deliberately building deep roots in Houston. And I remember even just thinking that I would be encouraging our kids to never move away from us because we weren't ever planning to move.
Yeah, I think they threw that back in our faces,
yes,
too.
They did.
Anyway, after this opportunity, I started doing phone interviews, and then I flew out to Cupertino a couple times to actually go on face-to-face interviews. And then in June, I was going to their annual developer conference, WWDC. And while I was there, I had a couple more opportunities show up and interviewed with those teams. And then I got an offer.
Which I was a little bit shocked about.
What?
Only because what that meant for us.
Oh, okay.
So we kind of had this pie in the sky thinking when we were talking about relocating to London.
Right.
And
nothing solid.
Well, talking about it and pulling the trigger is something else.
Totally.
Here you are dealing with this offer, which is this incredible opportunity. And even though you had been an entrepreneur like most of your life, the idea of working for Apple at this stage just felt right. And
it felt like something I couldn't say no to.
And while I understood that, I was in a job that I was super happy with, absolutely loved.
Great boss, great team.
And so it was really, really hard for me to entertain the idea of giving that up.
Plus, it also meant that the idea of London was pretty much off the table right then and there. So I pitched it as, well, think of San Francisco as a smaller London with less history, but better weather.
Exactly. And it was walkable.
It was walkable.
Threw out that to me.
Yeah, they have a transit system. It's not quite as extensive as the two, but
I feel like our hearts were being prepared and softened for the idea of having a new adventure.
That adventure caused us to change so many things. It really was a dramatic shift in our lifestyle and everything we were doing, but it also gave us one more step closer to finding Gina Marie. So it was a really great opportunity that came at the ideal time.
Yes, yes. Perfectly ordained. I don't think that you could have planned it any better. So almost 29 years to the day after we'd moved to Houston and started our brand new life, here you were in July of 2014, picking up and moving to San Francisco 2 weeks after you had gotten an offer to work with them. Then I started putting together all of the workings to be able to sell our home and move to San Francisco and join you.
Yeah, and that's an incredible story of how much we had to do and how much we had to change. So in episode 5, we're going to dig into all the details about what San Francisco's move did to us.
Well, it completely turned our lives around.
Right.
180 degrees.
But it also moved us so much closer to finding Gina Marie. I think everything was meant to happen that way.
Absolutely. 100%. If you're catching this episode on YouTube, please give us a thumbs up. And if you're listening to it on your favorite podcast player, please consider leaving a review for us.
And feel free to leave us comments if you're on YouTube or any questions you want at findingginamarie.com. You can get all our contact information, links to our other episodes. And if you're just listening to this, there's plenty of good content on YouTube as well.
Until next time.
Until next time.
Seeing artwork that...
Sure, absolutely. Ahem. Okay, here I go.
Siri, stop.
Ahem. Hang on, let me just...
You're not invited.